Shams University in Egypt, as well as a postgraduate degree from the AA, or Architecture Association in London. He also is currently working on his master's in Islamic Art and Architecture at the American University of Cairo. Waleed's first project was Dar Arafa Residence, which earned an AFAMA Award nomination in 2010. His latest constructed project, Basuna Mosque, in 2019, has been celebrated as the finalist and winner of many international awards, including Tamayouz Award of 2019. Waleed Arafa also won the Maison International Architecture Competition in the International University City in Paris, and he is currently working on the first mosque using earth construction techniques in Egypt. He continues to research, design, and build with an aim in mind of understanding the essence of architecture of Islam, hoping to contribute to a more egalitarian and sustainable global architecture. Please join me in welcoming Waleed Arafa.
Way of life. And so it's very exciting for me to be with those of you who will agree with me after a number of years on my view of architecture. You ready? Is it more comfortable for you for me to speak in English or Arabic, or should I mix? No? Okay. So obviously we're at the very beginning, or we're just finding our first steps into this. And when I was thinking of what to speak about today, I tried to stand in your shoes, and that's not very hard because my first year in architecture was maybe 1996, my first day of study. And I was thinking what I was thinking on that day. There were so many ideas and that were thrown at me as a young student of architecture. Obviously, the technological advancement at this time were picking up; they were accelerating, and a lot of people were casting doubt on the future of architecture. Whether architecture and the profession, the old or the ancient profession of architecture, is going to survive in the light of the advancements in artificial intelligence and all of the softwares that were emerging at the time. And so many people were casting doubts on whether this profession is going to continue or not. But thinking of this question and the different answers that were given, I concluded after many years that the conflict or the different opinions about this particular question, whether our profession is going to continue, and hence is it feasible to spend 5 years studying something that will be discontinued or replaced by artificial intelligence or whatsoever. These different answers were depending on an answer for a bigger question. What is architecture? Is architecture something that is just finding the most efficient robotic answers to function, or is architecture something different than that? There's also, and that led me to wonder about the difference between architecture on one hand and construction. These are two concepts that are interrelated, but they're not typical or not symmetrical. They're not the same thing, but often they are confused as if they are one and the same. And here, especially here, I'm showing a very simple structure on the left-hand side. This I saw this on the road on the lake in Fayoum, which is very low tech, but in my opinion, is very smart, and it resembles a lot of what architecture means. We have different structural systems here. We have the stone with a string. I'm not going to go into so much detail, but I mean something as simple as this, in my opinion, is more complex than what we have on the right-hand side, which is the very famous Burj Khalifa in Dubai. But I'm not intending in this very short time to give you answers. I just want to review with you questions that I had at the same age and time as you do now. And you have a lot of time studying architecture to think about your own answers. I don't think that I've arrived at full answers as well, even now, 20 years later, 25 years later, because I graduated 20 years ago. I've been 25 years now in architecture. But also, what is the difference between meanings to be served and technologies intended to serve them? So the idea of architecture as something that must have meaning. It is not just about the technologies of building, but building or the engineering component in architecture is something that is supposed to be serving. Thank you very much. Something to be serving a higher meaning. We have the Parthenon on the left, the Pantheon on the left-hand side, which is the 40-meter in diameter famous Roman dome, one of the biggest, or the biggest probably in the ancient times. And then we have the robotic arms and all the new techniques of bricklaying. But okay, fantastic, old technology, new technology. What kind of meaning does this serve, and what does this mean in the light for the future of architecture and the practice? What is the difference between vision and procedure? Here we have the famous clock tower in Mecca, which is grand, huge, and you see all the complexities here in the structure, all these megalithic cranes, and then we have a small dot here, which is the Kaaba. But if it weren't for this small dot, this small cube, none of this would have existed in this desert when this house was erected. This was a desert place, nobody was there, but because there was a certain meaning, now millions, and I dare say billions over the course of history, have flocked to this small dot that is very significant. It's small physically, but it's very significant in terms of meaning. I wondered, as a student of architecture, an Egyptian who belongs to the civilization of Islam, so that all of the previous questions have to do with architecture in general. I think these are questions that are must be asked by any student of architecture anywhere in the world. But also there's a more particular case here. I'm an Egyptian student of architecture who belongs to the civilization of Islam, not necessarily the religion of Islam, but in a place where the civilization of Islam has had its mark. What is the meaning or the set of meanings that I exclusively must serve? Because there are things that, even if I'm Mexican, Indian, or American, there are things that are would be in common with whatever an African, South African, an Egyptian, and a Chinese student of architecture. You'll have things in common, but there will be things that have to do with my own, with particularities that have to do with my own environment, with my own challenges, with my own development, or the historical development of where I live, and the aspirations of the people where I live as well. And what is the architecture what architectural quiddity does the world exclusively expect from myself and my colleagues? Especially in a globalized world where, despite of all the differences, the beautiful diversity that we have on planet Earth, but a lot of forces are trying to make us all the same in a non-creative way. They put us in a machine, we come out from the other end thinking of the same things despite of the diversity that we have. But also, what is Egyptian architecture? And what is its relation to the international schools of thought? Here we have pictures that soon, maybe within 2 months or so, into your study, you will learn about these different schools of thought, different manifestations through your study of the history of architecture. And what is its relation to all of its previous historical manifestations that has preceded it? So ancient Egyptian, Coptic, Islamic, which is a very big and controversial word because it includes a lot of different schools. So all of these could be called Egyptian architecture. What is the common thread? How was it influenced by Greek and Roman tributaries and its Arab and African and Mediterranean spheres of belonging? So we're not talking about technology here. We're talking about meaning, talking about history, talking about evolution. Is there a common thread that weaves all of this, linking the past with the present and taking us into the future? So from the very early beginnings, like for me, the day like today for you, and to this very moment, there's been continuous attempts in search of these answers. I don't think I've reached a final answer. I don't think there is a final answer. It's a continuous quest. But these were the questions that were on my mind when I embarked on my journey in architecture. Obviously, you have to prepare yourself with basic objective knowledge, so your understanding of engineering, the understanding of social sciences and humanities, the history of architecture, the history in general, languages, expression, aesthetics, colors. These are all topics that you're going to be exposed to and that you need to, in order to have a holistic or a wholesome approach to architecture. It's not just about construction, it's not just about materials, it's about all of the things. One of the things that drew me to architecture is that I had curiosity for many fields. So for me, it was what do I study exactly? I love medicine, I love physics, I love biology. Architecture, one of the great things about architecture is you can continue a relationship with all your curiosities through architecture. So if you're doing a hospital, for instance, you have to understand what is illness, what is healing, what is the psychological state of a sick person or an ill person, his relatives, the people who are trying to help them, and so on. And so the most similar thing to this, I may promote something else. I don't know if in MGU you teach movie directing. We're like movie directors. We deal with so many factors. We have to live into or stand in the shoes of many different roles all the time. And this keeps us in an encyclopedic or polymathic state of being. We're always often trying to understand and empathize with other people, with other roles, and bring all of this together and give it a physical manifestation, which is called architecture. So I'm going to share with you my very first steps in finding answers to the questions that I've just threw onto you, and that I hope you will be asking. So as soon as I graduated, so 5 years for you from now, I was faced with this question of a family house in Cairo, and it was a 20 by 30 meters plot of land, and I was supposed to create 4 units in this building. I'm not going to delve into details, but I'm just going to show you, and what I'd like you to think about seeing the different pictures that we're going to see is the different possibilities of the answers to the questions that I posed, because we often get caught, you will know about this later on, in form, that things are judged by only how they look. And I don't believe that this is true. How something looks, or what we call in architectural terms form, is something very essential to meaning, but it can vary greatly. Just like life can manifest itself in a human being, or a dinosaur, or a type of bacteria, or a flower. It's life. And obviously, they have different forms and different scales. So this was designed as soon as I graduated from school, and it was completed. The building was completed in 2006 to 2007, and it was nominated for an Aga Khan Award, which you learn in awards in architecture is something that is part of the motivation of our profession. I don't like to think of them as the only motivation one. It's a good chance for discussion and for exposure with other colleagues and architects, critics, and so on. Obviously, here the use of shadow and light. This is the interior of this building, and the interior of one of the units. So again, design varies in scale. We were looking at the building from the outside. Now we're looking at the building from the inside, but we're generally dealing with the same things. We're dealing with human perception. We're dealing with the human existence in terms of the physical existence, the psychological existence, and then the spiritual as well. So we have to deal with physical factors like light, thermal comfort, texture, color, all of this. These are our tools. This is the language that we use as architects. Okay, so I'm going to go through the pictures of the interior of this unit. One of the next buildings. This was not the next building right away from the first one, but another different language. Is the Dar Arafa Residence, which was designed and built between 2010 and 2011. And this was me trying to explore an ancient technique which is load-bearing. So the first one is skeletal concrete. It's a language that is only maybe 120 years old. But then load-bearing building or load-bearing buildings are very ancient. These are the first types of buildings on Earth. This is also New Cairo. It was on a similar piece of land, but it was required as a standalone house, one unit for one family. And because the area around it is the police academy, and hence there was limitations on the height, I decided that this is more economic, and the client, was in agreement. He liked the kind of language, and so we were testing this type of language. Obviously, we were taught, erroneously, I think, that these old techniques are limiting. You can't have big spans, but this was not entirely true, and this was my attempt to prove that this is not entirely true. It's the way you approach it. You don't have to imitate historical precedents. You can understand them and take them further to suit our needs today. So this is a 4-story building done completely in a load-bearing building. It's not finished, and luckily enough, it's not finished until today. And we've used it as a one-to-one model to teach students around the world, even from Germany and from inside Egypt as well, as a mock-up. We do a lot of field trips to this building and show them the building before it's finished. You can see the building construction, the details of this building. It still stands like this today. Then the next attempt to answer questions. This is on the Cairo Ismailia Desert Road in a place called Ahmad Arabi. And this is again a skeletal concrete building. And here the idea, or one of the governing ideas, was to use a single geometric pattern, but then interpret it in different ways. So the single pattern is the cube with an outline of an hexagon, and you can see it interpreted in a protruding manner here, but then in a carved manner here. And it's again how to capture light and shadow, how to make your building sing with nature, because architecture or any physical existence is very concrete. It's there, it's not going to change. But then we have cosmological phenomena like sunrise and sunset. The sun moves, and with the sun's motion, it changes its relationship with your building. And this changes the shadow, this changes the eye's perception of it. And this was an attempt to show this. So obviously trying to find different language here. If you compare this to the one before it, maybe you wouldn't know what is the relationship. But again, architecture is not only about what you see on the outside. Then there's this building that was designed in King Tamayouz near Alexandria. This was 2006. It has not been constructed, so what you're seeing here are renders. And again, it was another attempt to explore the load-bearing vault and arch and dome ancient technique, but in a way that would overcome its historical aesthetic. So to prove that you can do a building that looks like it's from today, but using an ancient technique, and use this exploded version as if we've taken the walls that are surrounding the building, the skin, so you can see the building from the inside, which has its, when you do building construction, you appreciate this more. And then the roof, and how to also use all of this to improve the environmental performance of the building and the economics. We're a country where construction is very expensive. And this is one of the questions, economy is one of the questions that we should be asking and trying to improve as architects. Maybe your generation will do better breakthroughs than us. These are shots from the interior. And then there's the Basuna Mosque, which I started designing in 2015. I started building late 2016, and I finished early 2019. And this is in a very rural place in a village called Basuna in the governorate of Sahar. And this piece of land here had a mosque built over it 70 years earlier, and then there was also an older version, 300 years. The version before this one collapsed, and they wanted a new mosque. We have a graveyard here. You can see the skyline of the village. You can see older buildings here. But then you can see the encroaching new buildings built in the past maybe 50, 60 years. And the question here is something also that you will learn about in architecture, the importance of context. Okay, so how do we build where? We should not be building the same thing everywhere. I'll give a very simple and superficial example for this. It's like we need clothes for a number of reasons. So we need it as an aesthetic, for aesthetic reasons, but we need them for functional reasons that have to do with thermal comfort. We need them to give us privacy, and we need them also for aesthetic reasons. But what you dress, how you would dress like in the morning going to university is different than if you're going in the morning to a club, to a sporting club, or if you're going to a wedding, or if you're going to not that kind of club. You dress differently also for a club. Anyhow, as the factors change, okay, the function, the meaning. So in Egypt, we dress in black for funerals. So here we're talking about symbolism. We're talking about what color means, what a certain cut, or a certain texture. It's the same thing. So I'll go through the pictures of the mosque also, so to give you some kind of visual ideas about what we're talking about. This is the main entrance. This is what you see in as soon as you make it through the main entrance. On top there's the entrance dome, which is a very historical reference to the Grand Mosque in Cordoba, Spain. And then you see the central dome and the ceiling, which is trying to capture cold air and natural light, regulated in a way that makes the person inside this building environmentally comfortable, and to give them also certain messages through light and shadow. As you can see here, here's the building empty, here's the building in use during Friday prayers, the mihrab and the central dome, and the solution for the roof. Again at night. This is, for instance, during the highest angle for solar angle during the year. So about in the week of the 21st of June, where the sun is highest in this location, about 84 degrees. So, you know, in the tropics, it's 90 degrees. 84 is a little bit, just 6 angles low, and you can see that from the sun rays going through the roof. You don't have to be scared if you don't understand everything I'm talking about, but I'm hoping that a year from now, you will remember these things and you see what were our notes. This is our music as architecture. This is what we use. So different, and you can see that every facade, every elevation, every side of the building is different according to what it overlooks, to where its location is with regards to the solar path, and the life of people, different things, different angles, how it relates to the heights and aesthetics of the building close to it. So this is the Basuna Mosque, and then I'll take you to a completely different context. So after I finished the Basuna Mosque, there was an international competition for the House of Egypt, or the Maison in Paris, in an international campus where each country since 1930 had its own house where they would be able to, it's like a dormitory, but also a cultural center that is dedicated to the students of a specific country. So there's the House of the USA, the House of Britain, the House of Japan, and so on. And Egypt was meant to have its house since 1952, but for different reasons, we haven't had the project done. And then in 2019, a competition was done, and a lot of Egyptian and French firms entered the competition. And I was lucky to win this with my French partner, Sam Architects. And so these are renders, but the construction has started on the site 2 months ago. And in 2023, it will be open. So if any of you are going to continue their studies in Paris for some reason, you might get a chance to stay in one of these rooms. It was 9 meters high. We have this tree in the middle of the site, which is a red beech, which was over 100 years old. And so one of the conditions of the competition was to do your building without touching a buffer zone that is 10 meters circled around the tree. And so I decided to use that in forming the building, and that's why you see the circle. What we see here is the eastern facade of the building, which has the main entrance, this one here. Okay. And then in the back, we have the Prefery, the Prefery in Paris, and then the rest of the campus is to the northern side. And across from us, which was one of the things that intrigued me to enter this competition and leave other multi-million projects in Saudi Arabia that were guaranteed contracts to go into a competition because that I did not know if I'm going to win or not, but because of the challenges. Because across from the building, we had the very famous Fondation Suisse, or the House of Switzerland, which was done by Le Corbusier, the very famous architect that you understand. The French claim him and the Swiss claim him, but I think he's more Swiss than French. And this was one of his earliest buildings that are very important in the history of architecture, because it's one of his early buildings where he raised his building above the landscape. So he went on columns. This building is just across from me. There's a football field separating the two buildings. And so for me, this was a chance to have a conversation with a building that affected me from my very first year in architecture. This is the interior of the lobby. This is an interior shot of what the single room in this building will look like. Another shot with some transparency, showing also the idea. So here the problem is to pay attention to the French context, but you're doing an Egyptian building, but you're doing it within a French context, French climate, French surrounding, but you're doing something that's supposed to represent Egypt. So how would you negotiate something like this? This is what you see if you're in the house of the Swiss students. If you're standing in that building, this is how you see our building, which is here. And this is an existing building, the South Korean house. And then I finished with this building, which is in progress, and it might be built very close to you around here in Sheikh Zayed. And it is a mosque, no dome. So again, this was something, I mean, when you get there, you may meet again and discuss it. And the idea was to do it with round earth, but also with other structural systems to maximize the benefit from something like steel structure and earth construction. These are interior shots. That's it. I hope I've stimulated your brains and
thank you, Waleed. We are now opening the floor for any questions. Please raise your hand if you have any questions for me.
It's going to be over 5 years. We don't want to rush you. If you have anything to say, you can say it.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
My question is very simple. You have to hear a marketing question, whether we go for architecture, because one, two, it's the theory is it's underpaid and a lot of work versus if you go for high underrated on most of the other. So especially that's also so if you disregard your situation, how about the rest of the weeks? If you get all that as you think,
Am I successful?
are you sure?
I mean, what is the criteria for success?
What you reach so far.
I think your question is very important, but please carry on. So this is the second one. I didn't hear that. I'm not sure if I heard your first concern correctly.
She's asking if people are saying that architecture is not a well-paid job.
In comparison to other, it's a lot of work, and it's underpaid. And being a girl would not be as easy to go work. It's interesting to study, but maybe it should be considered for the future in pursuing such career. So my question was,
Should I or should I not?
it's not about that. If you want something you should pursue instead My question is, how can someone overcome the other barriers in such a career? Okay, and part of it from your point of view for yourself, but part of it your colleagues.
I'm going to answer this question. Thank you very much. I love this question because I'm sure this is something that goes on in a lot of minds, and I don't think it concerns architecture only. But I'm going to answer you in a number of ways. Okay, the first one is very simple. You know, the people said love, 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 love. Love is how you. I'm going to start with your last question, which is how to overcome the barriers. If you love something, then you will be special. If you're special, then you will do it no matter what. There's no such thing as there is. I mean, all of your concerns are true. There is a barrier for women, and that's not only in Egypt, by the way. I actually find that the practice of females in Egypt in architecture, or generally, I mean, we have equal pay. We don't have unequal pay for genders here in Egypt. I've never heard about that. But we do have that in London or Britain. I've worked in Britain. I've spent half of my life outside. I was born in the States. And this is still an issue in the West, the progressive West, which we don't have here. But again, let me answer you in different ways. First of all, if you really love what you do, then you'll be different and you will be sought after. It takes patience because maybe you think I'm successful today, but you can see how many times I couldn't afford to pay my bills. But other times, if I'm picking between my different, looking at the different makes of cars that are Porsche or Alfa Romeo, we're making it happen now. Okay, so life is ups and downs, but this is not happiness. Happiness is when you're doing what you like. So I was not less happy when I was struggling to pay my bills, and I'm not more happy now that I'm after it. And I don't guarantee that I'll be after it forever. If you look at the stories of all great architects, because great has to be in parentheses, because what is the criteria for greatness? You will find that their life is ups and downs, like anybody. Underpaid. This could be the truth of any starter in any job. But once you become someone special, then you can dictate. I dictate my fees, for instance, now, and that doesn't necessarily mean that I have a huge account in my bank, because I take that money and out of love I reinvested in my research and so on. My wife is an architect. By the way, she's a graduate of UCL, which is, I understand this place, it's the Newgiza University works collaboration with them. And she had exciting, from the onset, she had very exciting jobs all around the world. She's been the head of design and display. And this is also another answer. You're saying Egypt. We're not in Egypt only anymore. The way I see this program and how it's set up, this is preparing these students, these young people, to be world players. They can work anywhere. My wife, who graduated from UCL, worked in Egypt. When she was still in the second year, she got a training opportunity at the Bibliotheca Alexandria when it was being constructed. Later on, she worked with Abdel Halim Ibrahim doing the American University campus. And she was not well paid, but she was paid in a wealth of knowledge. She then became the head of design and display in Islamic Museum in Malaysia. It was a dumpster, and she made it into a beautiful museum. That is a beautiful venue now that people look after. She's a female. And then she worked on the Egyptian Grand Museum with her London-based practice. She has done her own thing. So I don't see her having any problems as a female. And I'd say even in Egypt more than anywhere else. What are the other concerns? I mean, underpaid, talked about that. So it's all, again, I go back to my first answer, which is love. If you love it, you will be special, and then all these barriers will melt away. It won't matter. And today we have a lot of examples. I mean, Zaha Hadid is maybe the most famous one, but there are so many other people. There's Basuna Mosque from Iran, There's Habiba Majdalani, who was about my age that I met in a conference from Iran, where Iran is today. And she's someone who's asked to lecture. She practices and she lectures in Italy and the States, and there's no barrier. And it's a very repressive regime where she stays in practice. She tells me horrendous stories about how some clients come and they find out that she's a woman because they go after the name of the office. They love what she does, but they don't know it's a woman behind it, and then they say, we don't want to do it. But then there are others who are open-minded, and she's doing great stuff, and she's published and she's sought after. So I don't see a problem. If you love it, go for it.
Yes.
I can't hear it small.
Okay, so architecture in university, certification of how many people do workload, and that's kind of engineering, so that's all this. But is it like really too much in like an overall way, or is it too much and perfectly?
The workload is tremendous, and statistically, I'll tell you the trick. Statistically, we're supposed to be the hardest discipline to study. However, as I say, Aminah is just a fresh grad. She started working with me a month ago. We don't call it work. I don't see it as separate from my life. I don't go to my job and then I go to, and it doesn't mean that I don't have a balance in my life. I'm married, I have children, and I spend enough time with my family. But during my time of practicing direct architecture, because I think everything I do in my life is architecture. Even when I'm going swimming, I'm thinking about it. When I'm doing my kickboxing, I'm thinking spatial solutions. It's all space and time and all of this. It's, as I said, I believe it's a way of life. If you love it, you're not going to win. Yes, at times you will want to go to sleep, many times. I mean, as soon as I finish, I'm 178 centimeters high, and the biggest weight I've ever reached in university was 63 kilograms. You can imagine how thin I was. Okay. As soon as I finished school or delivered my graduation project, I put on 10 kilograms. I started becoming a human being. Yeah. Just because I could get sleep, but I enjoyed every bit of it. And there was another point that you reminded me of, which is also architecture is very famous. Studying architecture, I mean, like most of the Hollywood or successful directors, movie directors in the world were originally architects. Architecture is something that is similar to gymnastics in sports. If your son or daughter doesn't know what to do at a very early age, people usually put them into gymnastics because then whatever they want to do later on, their body is prepared to take on whichever kind of load. If they want to be runners or swimmers, it's like some kind of basic preparation. Architecture makes you think in a certain way. So even sometimes people study 5 years of architecture, they're not wasted. They go into movie directing, they go into set design. It's a platform that you can plug in so many other disciplines in. So that's also something very important about architecture. The best movie director in the history of Egyptian cinema, Shadi Abdel Salam, he didn't study architecture particularly, but it was a very close discipline. I believe he was in the Beaux-Arts and interior design or something like this. It's a way of thinking, and it combines, as I said, many things. So the workload, if you're in love with it, if you're in love with the thing, again, you wouldn't want to. I mean, I used to work 14, 15 hours a day before I got married. When I got married, I also have to do architecture in different ways, including being a father and being a husband, all of that. But it's extended. I don't stop architecture.